All right, as our first social issue in the Google module, let's talk about two really big concepts. One is authority and the other one is privacy. So we're going to talk about these in general, and as always in this course, I want you to think in the context of the current module, think in the context of Google, but don't exclusively think of Google. Google is just an example of how this stuff is playing out across the world. And more than anything else, in all of these social concepts, what I want you to understand is we're just kind of figuring it out. We're just trying to understand these concepts. There have been old concepts of authority, there have been old concepts of privacy, now there are new concepts of authority and privacy, and what I'd like to do is help you sort of just outline the contours of these issues so that you yourself can begin thinking about them and helping the world figure them out, which is really what I want you to accomplish coming out of this course, is to be prepared to help the world figure these things out, because we haven't. We certainly haven't. We're just at the beginning. All right, I want to kick this idea of authority and trust off with authority and privacy off with one simple concept, and that's the concept of trust. And what these two issues, especially these two issues, have hinged on is who don't you trust? What don't you trust? How are we being manipulated? How are we being taken advantage of? But what I want to start with is exactly the opposite, and kind of give you this idea that that what is happening in the vast majority of cases when humans interact with other humans is not the lack of trust, but the amount of trust. The very fact that we have a society, the very fact that we have any kind of organized social interactions at all is completely based on trust. You have a certain amount of trust that the people around you are going to do certain things and are going to respect certain parts of your rights and your responsibilities, and that's what makes the world go round. So in stark contrast to how this issue is often framed, that there's a very, very large lack of trust in the world, I want you to begin from this concept that there's not a lack of trust in this world. This world runs on trust. This world is completely built on trust. If it wasn't for the vast amount of trust that happens in this world, nothing could occur at all. No two people could get along at all because their entire interaction is based on trust. And I love this cartoon because it's so perfect. It's so perfect to show the hidden face of trust. Okay, so we're going to talk a lot about what you don't trust and how you come to be able to trust things. But I want you to really understand and begin from this concept that it's not, the vast majority of interactions are hugely trusted interactions between human beings, and everything you do is based on that trust. All right, so let's start with this idea of authority. And let me give you a definition first of all. Authority is, let me get these guys goodbye. Authority is what is the trusted, definitive, absolutely beyond question source. So when I say I'm an authority on fire hydrants, that means that what I say about fire hydrants is to be trusted. It's to be respected. You know that I have put my time into what I say about fire hydrants is really what is true. That's the idea of authority. And authority is someone who can speak authoritatively about a subject, definitively. That idea of a definitive is that's the one. There's no other one that's better than that. So that's the idea of authority. Authority is my or someone's ability to speak in a way that is beyond reproach. Okay, that's the idea of authority. And so the concept of authority really is at issue now. We had an old way of doing it, and now there's lots of new parts to that idea of authority that are coming in and need to be sorted out. And that's what I'm hoping you do, is I hope you sort it out for all of us and help us figure this stuff out. All right, so I want to establish two different parts of authority, and that's trusting the source of the information and trusting the information itself. And when it comes to trusting the source of the information, I'm not really telling you anything new here, but I am maybe putting some context around it and giving you some words to describe it. First of all, why would you trust a person? Well, you might trust them because you have personal experience with them. You grew up with them. You know them very well. You know what they know and what they don't know. You know where their boundaries are. You know when they're lying and when they're telling the truth. You have personal experience, and that's really, in the end, that's the most basic form of trust. I know this person very well. I can trust them. And you can see that even with people that you know very well, sometimes you don't know when you could trust them. even with people that you've grown up with people that you've known your entire life. It's not always entirely, oh, that horn there, that's a boat telling the bridge to go up. So I'm right near the Fremont Bridge, it's going to go up. By the way, the Fremont Bridge, which is only about 100 meters from me right now, is the bridge in the world that goes, it's the bridge in the entire world, the drawbridge in the entire world that goes up the most times per day. Just a fun fact to know and tell. All right, so trusting the source. Personal experience is the first major idea in trusting the source. If you have personal experience with them, then you're going to trust them. Now, of course, you have less and less personal experience with the people that you're called upon to trust, because your world, your social network, your world of relationships in the world is getting larger and larger, and is often containing people that you've never met, people that you don't have much experience with. Okay, so personal experience, and then the credentials of the credentials of the speaker, the credentials of the source of the information, either official credentials that come from some institution that you trust, a government or a educational institution or a large corporation or something like that. For example, Google. Do I trust because it comes from Google? They're a very large organization. If I trust Google, somebody from Google is trustworthy. In fact, I do that all the time in the videos that you see. I call upon people who are representatives of large organizations to speak authoritatively, to speak definitively about the subjects that we cover, because I assume that because they're affiliated with a large organization that I know and to some extent trust, that we can trust what they're saying as really representing what's going on for that organization or what's going on in general. So institutions give a lot of credentials or credibility to the source. Your social network in today also gives credentials to the source. If I ask for a recommendation for who should I talk to about XYZ, travel arrangements or something like that, and my social network comes back and tells me, oh, you should talk to these guys, I'm going to trust that because I have a recommendation from from someone who can vouch for that speaker or that source of information. Okay, now another one, which, you may say, well, why is this a criteria for trusting the source? But it is, and it absolutely is, the popularity of the source. If it's very, very popular, then I'm going to trust it. And this explains why movie stars, for example, when they come out and they support some kind of cause, that cause, it becomes all of a sudden very credible. Before it wasn't very credible, nobody knew about it. A movie star who's very popular, but popular for what? Popular for acting a talent or looks or something like that, speaks out about a certain issue, and then all of a sudden everyone's trusting what they say, everyone's going with that. So the credibility the trust in the source of information comes from these three major elements. Your personal experience with the source, which you may or may not have, the credentials of the source, who's vouched for them, either institutions or other people that you know, and sadly but true, the popularity of the source. The more popular that source is, the more you're likely to trust it. Okay, so we're outlining the idea of authority. What counts as authority? If I trust the source, it's authoritative, it's definitive. Now, that's the source, that's where it came from. Now, how about the information itself? Suppose I know nothing about the source, it just comes up on a random web page and I don't know them, nobody I know knows them, I don't know whether they're popular or not, and there's no institutional affiliation, there's nobody vouching for that. I can still make a lot of judgment about how trustworthy or how credible that information is just from looking at the information, just from my experience with information in general. So first of all, does the thing make logical sense? Does it hang together? So as you're doing your blog post, for example, this is a big deal. I will trust your blog post if you make sense, if your argument makes sense and there's no big holes in it, if it's logically consistent. That's a big deal. That really, in addition to all of these criteria about the source of information, the information itself will be trustworthy if it makes sense, if there's no big holes in the argument. And you've seen this many times, I'm sure, in your life. That guy didn't make any sense at all. And even though he's a movie star or a rock star or something like that, the thing he just said or the thing she just said just doesn't make sense, so I ain't going to trust it. Right? So these things are not mutually exclusive. They interplay. And all of these things, whether you know it or not, are coming into account when you look at a piece of information and decide whether it's authoritative or not. Okay, does it make logical sense? Is it consistent with what I already know? This is a kind of an interesting one because things that reiterate beliefs you already have are more trusted to you than things that don't. Why is that? Well, my experience says X, they're saying Y, and X and Y don't go together, so I don't trust what they're saying. Now, you got to be kind of wary about that, because if that was solely and totally true, you'd never change your opinion about anything, right? Because you'd only listen to things that are already in your opinion sphere, and you'd never listen to things that are outside your opinion sphere, and you'd never change. You'd never do anything different. So this factor interacts with all the other factors, but by and large, things that you already agree with are more trustworthy than things that you don't already agree with. And what you're saying, in effect, there is that, well, I know something about this too. And what I know about it is in contrast to what you know about it, and so I don't trust what you're saying about it. I think you're off the wall. Okay, there's another one here that's kind of more subterranean, below the surface, and that's, how does it hit you emotionally? How does it make you feel? And this is a huge deal in the trustworthiness of information. If it, let's see how to put this. Let me just not give a specific example and just give it to you in general. An emotional appeal to your pride, to your integrity, to all the things that you believe in, to all the deep felt emotions that you have, is going to influence your judgment of whether something is trustworthy or not. So for example, if I read a web page and I'm a very patriotic person, and that web page appeals to my patriotism, that's going to make me trust the source even more. Even if it's not necessarily logical, or even if it's not consistent with what I believe, it's appealing to me at a gut level, not an intellectual level. The logic is about the intellectual level. This emotional appeal is about a gut level. And if it appeals to me emotionally, if it hits me in my gut, I'm much more likely to trust it. Okay, that's the idea of what authority is, and I'm hoping that outlines the issues for you, and you can use this as a way, as kind of a little gauge. As you look at information, you can kind of go check, 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 and instead of having these things be below the surface, instead of having them operate inside you but you not being aware of them, say to yourself, this is a piece of information. Okay, what's the source? Do I have any experience with this source? Yeah, I've been reading this blog for a long time, so I have a lot of experience with it. Check. Are they credentialed? Is the person a PhD or whatever, you know? And yeah, check. Is he or she popular? Yeah, this blog gets tons and tons of hits. Those are reasons why I think I should trust it. Or I might go the other way and say, well, even though they're popular, you know, that's tending me to trust them, but I don't trust them because of whatever else. You know, they don't have the right logic, or their emotional appeal, they were appealing to emotion I just don't have, or whatever. Okay. So the idea here is to become aware of this, to understand it, to use it in your life. All right, now we're going to look at the old system of authority granting, specifically for published information. When I say published information, I mean information that's publicly available, like newspapers, books, magazines, etc., before the web. Right? So before the web, our published information really took mostly those forms, maybe also television and radio. Those were published forms of information. And I'm going to zero in specifically on the idea of expertise. And the diagram that you see here is sort of a flow chart. It's a series of steps that explains how a decision is made to publish a research article. So of all the different kinds of information, the research article is the one that goes through the most rigorous process to decide whether or not it should be published. And so that's what I want to focus on. And obviously, this same idea applies to television shows, it applies to magazines and newspapers and books and all that other stuff, but I wanted to show you one that was the most rigorous because it most clearly outlines the difference between the old way of establishing authority and the new ways of establishing authority. So the old way of establishing authority is all about expertise. If you're an expert on a subject, then you get to say whether or not this new piece of information on that subject is authoritative or not. So the major thing to notice about this diagram here is it's all about people. People, 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 people. Editor's decision. The editor is a person. To first review, those reviewers are people. Decision. Somebody, a person, makes the decision. Second review, people. Decision. Second review, decision, people. It's all about people, and it's all about people who are already considered to be authorities making a decision about whether this next thing should be produced. So books have publishers. Those publishers serve as the authority. They serve as the experts, and they decide whether the new book gets to be published. In a magazine, magazines have editors. In a newspaper, newspapers have editors. Those editors are exactly the same idea. They're all about deciding whether this thing gets through the gate. So the old notion of authority, the old notion of whether or not a piece of information gets to be at all in the public realm is all about expertise, and it's all about gatekeepers, people who are already they already have some established amount of credibility, authority in the field, and they get to decide what next things come into the field. And that's really the basis of how authority has worked for a very, very long time in published information. Now let's look at the New World. The New World certainly still has expertise. That's still going on. So in all the cases that I talk about in this course, the old stuff doesn't go away. The old stuff just gets augmented. It gets sort of filled in with some new things that weren't possible before. And so what are the new things that are possible now? Algorithms. Remember, we've talked about algorithms a number of times, and an algorithm is a process. An algorithm is a procedure. An algorithm is a set of steps. And usually, in fact, almost always, in the algorithms we're going to talk about in this course, they're a set of automated steps, a set of steps that a computer takes. So whereas the old world was all about experts saying what could and couldn't happen, good morning. In the new world, we have computers saying what can and can't happen. We have algorithms, automated processes, and the diagram that we went through in the first part of this Google module about what Google does in order to decide how to index and create results. That's an example of an algorithm. It even kind of looks like an algorithm. Step, 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 step. At the end, we have a result. Algorithms are now a large part of deciding what's authoritative. And just to understand that, think about what is authoritative. Well, authoritative or definitive, or the one that I'm really going to trust, is the one that comes up at the top of the Google results when I search for something. If I search for, social unrest, whatever the top result is, I'm going to pay a lot of attention to that, and that's going to make a difference to me. And that's created by an algorithm. No experts in there, no people deciding what goes in there. There are algorithms. And so theoretically, the algorithm was created by an expert who knew exactly how to judge these things, but in effect, it's really a program, and the program is deciding what's authoritative. So in addition to this expertise selection of what's authoritative, we also have computer algorithms selecting what's authoritative. We also have social ranking. So you know this very well. In fact, in a way, all you really need to do to explain this social ranking is to use that word that I talked about before, popularity. The more popular something is, the more trusted it is. And now we have lots and lots of ways of saying how popular something is. Popularity figures into the Google ranking algorithm, you know that already, but popularity figures in all over the place. Like, for example, on Amazon.com, people who liked what you like also like this. That's a form of popularity. And popularity is giving us authority all over the place. It's telling us what to trust. And it's based on that criteria that I told you before, that if something is popular, it's more trustworthy. So social ranking is also a big place where authority is coming from. And then the crowd, or something called crowdsourcing. Wikipedia is a great example of that. Why is Wikipedia trustworthy? Why is Wikipedia authoritative? Why is Wikipedia definitive? When I find something and it's on Wikipedia, I'm likely to trust it. But what's the basis of that trust? It's not because of experts, it's not because of algorithms, it's not even because of popularity. It's because lots and lots and lots of people have looked at it. Now this is really interesting because it's so new, it's so different than that old model of authority coming from experts. This is authorities coming from lots and lots of people simultaneously looking at this thing and all checking it over. And if lots and lots of people are checking it over, it must be okay, it must be right. I've experienced this many times in this very class, where there's 150 people out there in the audience all looking at my slide, and among those 150 people, somebody's got to find the problem. Somebody's got to find the error. Somebody's got to find the thing that I missed or I didn't think about. And so that's an example of the crowd. This idea of crowdsourcing has gone really far, and there's lots and lots of really, really interesting examples of crowdsourcing. One that I really love the most is called Mechanical Turk. And I think Mechanical Turk is, I think it's owned by Amazon. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's owned by Amazon. Yeah, it's not owned by Google, it's owned by Amazon. This Mechanical Turk is hundreds of thousands of people, or millions of people all around the world, all getting little jobs. And so if I want my college paper edited, you might take advantage of this actually. I submit my college paper to Mechanical Turk and it goes out among the entire world, this huge crowd of people, and someone's going to look at it across the world. So that's a huge base of, is it expertise? It's hard to know. We hope it's expertise. We hope the people who are creating the Wikipedia articles are the world's experts on that information, and they're self-selected, so we don't know or not. But the idea remains that if lots and lots of people are looking at this thing, it must be, and they've all gone over it, and they've all put input into it, and they've all edited, and they've all changed it, it must be pretty authoritative because the crowd is right. That's an interesting idea, and it's opposed to the expert is right. The expert is right, or is the crowd right? And I'll let you kind of decide that on an individual basis in different places that you visit. All right, so this is the idea of vetting. Before the web, I vetted pretty much solely on the basis of expertise. After the web, I vet or decide whether something is authoritative, decide whether it gets through by expertise, but also by algorithm, and also by social ranking, and also by the crowd, by mob techniques. The crowd must know, the crowd must make something authoritative. Okay, so by way of a bit of a summary, but also by way of introducing you to what you need to think about considering authority, let's look at some of the major issues, some of which I've already discussed, some of which are kind of new. First of all, who gets to say? Who gets to be on top? Who gets to speak at all? Who gets to have an opinion? Who gets to disagree? And who gets to be trusted? Those are all issues that, because of the changeover and all these new techniques that we have, are kind of up in the air. You know, we used to say, it used to be very clear and very straightforward. Well, people with lots of training, they go into publishing organizations and they get to decide, and no one really, you know, there's certainly people complained about it, but they didn't complain much. It was mostly an accepted system. Now we have all of these new ways coming up, and we really don't know. So as I said at the very beginning of this lecture, I want you to start figuring this out. I want you to start figuring out, how do we manage all these things? How do we put together crowdsourcing and crowd voting with social networking, with algorithms, with expertise, and come up with a way that is okay and will take us into the future? The place of someone like Google is a very interesting issue. Should Google be the one who's in charge of what comes up to the top of search results? In effect, Google is our way of accessing all the information on the web, by and large. You know, I mean, really, they are. You know, there's a few, you know, also RANs, but Google's on top for sure. And so Google's on top, and what Google puts on top becomes the most trusted, the most used, the most widely cited source. And is that okay? I don't know whether it's okay or not. It's up for you to decide, but I'll pose the issue. Is that okay? Should that be something that's done by governments or something like that? Who else would do it? Where else would that come from? Okay, and then finally, in what case do we use which things? And specifically the crowd versus the experts. The crowd has some capabilities that experts don't. Experts have some capabilities that crowds don't. And it's up in the air as to who should be trusted under what circumstances and how to put those together. All right, so that's the issue of authority. And there's a lot going on there. And as always in this class, I'm only just touching the surface of these issues. But I want to get you thinking. And more than thinking, I want to get you acting. I want to get you carefully considering these things and beginning to put them together and beginning to figure them out.